They said his boy had 3 months left and there was nothing left to do. The doctors delivered their verdict like a death sentence wrapped in clinical politeness. And I stood there in that sterile Manhattan hospital corridor, my weathered hands clutching a small teddy bear, watching a multimillionaire crumble before my eyes. Maybe you're taking care of children whose parents never notice your efforts, or cleaning up while the house is quiet. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? I promise, today's story will touch your heart. My name is Elena, and for 6 years I was invisible in their marble mansion on the Upper East Side. I was the woman who knew every lullaby that could calm little Thomas when thunder shook the windows. I was the one who counted his heartbeats during fever-soaked nights, who memorized which corner of his blanket he needed to fall asleep. I was his nanny, but in my heart, I was so much more. The Whitmore family fortune came from investments in the stock market, real estate portfolios that stretched across Manhattan, and cryptocurrency holdings that multiplied their wealth beyond imagination. Their assets included everything from vintage wine collections to Bitcoin investments that generated passive income while they slept. Richard Whitmore could buy anything money could touch, but he couldn't buy time for his dying son. I remember the first day I walked into their penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. The marble floors reflected my nervous face as I clutched my single suitcase. Mrs. Whitmore, Victoria, glided toward me in designer heels that cost more than my monthly salary. Her blonde hair was pulled into a perfect chignon, her lips painted the color of expensive roses. "You come highly recommended," she said, her voice carrying that particular coldness that wealthy New Yorkers perfect like an art form. "Thomas is a difficult child. Sensitive. We need someone who understands boundaries." Boundaries. Even then, that word felt like a warning. Thomas was 3 months old when I first held him. He was so small, so fragile, with these enormous brown eyes that seemed to hold secrets far too heavy for such a tiny soul. His first smile was for me, not his parents. His first word wasn't mama or dada, it was Lena, his baby pronunciation of Elena. I treasured that moment like a mother treasures her child's first steps. The Whitmores lived in a world I could never understand. Their dinner parties featured guests whose net worth appeared in Forbes magazine. They discussed stock market fluctuations over champagne that cost more than my rent. Richard would spend evenings reviewing investment portfolios while Victoria planned charity galas that raised millions for causes she'd forget by morning. But in the nursery, with Thomas sleeping in my arms, none of their fortune mattered. I was the one who watched him grow from a colicky infant into a curious toddler. I was there for his first fever, his first nightmare, his first scraped knee in the private playground they'd built on their roof garden. "Don't get too attached," Victoria reminded me regularly, usually while examining her reflection in the hallway mirror. "He's not your child, Elena. Remember your place. Remember your place." Those words became the soundtrack to my invisible life. I lived in a small room off the kitchen, furnished with cast-off furniture from their previous decorator. My window faced the building's courtyard, not the park like theirs. I ate my meals after the family finished, often standing at the kitchen counter while reviewing Thomas's schedule for the next day. When they traveled to their house in the Hamptons or their ski lodge in Aspen, I stayed behind to maintain their Manhattan operations, paying bills, coordinating with housekeeping, managing appointments. During those early years, I watched Thomas blossom into the most beautiful child I'd ever known. He had his father's determined chin and his mother's elegant bone structure, but his spirit was pure and unguarded. He would run to me when he scraped his knee, curl up in my lap during thunderstorms, and whisper his dreams about becoming a superhero who could help sick children feel better. The irony would become clear later. As Thomas grew older, I began to notice things, small things at first. He tired more easily than other children his age. His appetite was inconsistent. Sometimes he'd complain of stomach aches that weren't related to anything he'd eaten. Victoria dismissed these concerns with the confidence of someone whose problems had always been solved with money. "All children go through phases," she'd say, not looking up from her tablet where she monitored their investment returns. "Don't be such a worrier, Elena." But I was a worrier. It's what kept Thomas safe during those long afternoons when his parents disappeared into their world of business meetings and social obligations. I worried about the shadows under his eyes, the way he'd sometimes stop playing mid-game to catch his breath, the frequency of his requests to be carried instead of walking. When Thomas was 4, I convinced Victoria to schedule a pediatric appointment. The doctor, in their exclusive practice on Fifth Avenue, ran basic tests and proclaimed Thomas healthy. Relief flooded through me like warm honey. Maybe I had been overthinking things. Maybe my own fears were coloring my perception. But mothers know things. Even nannies who love like mothers know things. The financial markets crashed that winter, and even the Whitmores felt the sting. Richard spent long nights on phone calls with his investment advisors, trying to rebalance portfolios and minimize losses. Their cryptocurrency holdings lost significant value, though they still maintained enormous wealth by anyone else's standards. But in their world, any reduction in net worth felt catastrophic. Victoria became even more distant, more critical. She'd scrutinize household expenses with new intensity, questioning why Thomas needed new clothes or why I'd purchased organic fruit instead of regular. The staff began to feel nervous about their job security. 2 housekeepers were let go. The private chef was replaced with someone less expensive. But I stayed. I always stayed. Thomas turned 5 on a snowy February morning. Victoria organized a party for 12 privileged children whose parents belonged to the same exclusive circle. I helped Thomas get ready, brushing his dark hair until it gleamed, straightening his little bow tie, whispering encouragement about what a special boy he was. During the party, I served cake and supervised games from the edges of the room. I watched Thomas try to keep up with the other children, saw him pause frequently to rest, noticed how he seemed smaller and paler next to his energetic friends. When little Sarah Morrison asked why Thomas looked so tired, Victoria quickly redirected the conversation. That night, after all the guests departed and the catering staff cleaned up, I found Thomas sitting on his bedroom floor surrounded by unopened presents. He looked up at me with those enormous brown eyes, now rimmed with exhaustion. "Lena," he whispered, "why do I feel so tired all the time?" I knelt beside him and pulled him into my arms, breathing in the familiar scent of his Johnson's baby shampoo. In that moment, every instinct I possessed screamed that something was seriously wrong. But I was just the nanny. What did I know? "Sometimes growing boys need extra rest," I told him, hating myself for the lie. "Let's get you ready for bed, sweetheart." Spring arrived early that year, coating Central Park in green hope. I took Thomas for daily walks, pushing his stroller even though he was old enough to walk. He didn't complain. If anything, he seemed relieved to let someone else do the work of moving forward. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday. Victoria called me into the library where she and Richard sat behind his mahogany desk, financial documents scattered between them like fallen leaves. Her face was composed, but I could see the tremor in her hands. "The doctors want to run more tests," she said without preamble. "Thomas has been experiencing some irregularities. Blood work shows concerns." Richard cleared his throat. His investment portfolio lay open on his computer screen, numbers glowing red. Even facing his son's health crisis, he couldn't fully disconnect from monitoring their financial position. "It could be nothing," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "These doctors, they run every test imaginable. More revenue for them, you understand." But I understood something else entirely. I understood the way Thomas had been fading before my eyes, like a photograph left too long in sunlight. I understood that all their millions in assets, their diversified investment portfolio, their Bitcoin holdings worth more than small countries' budgets, none of it could protect their little boy from whatever was stealing his strength. The tests stretched across weeks. Blood draws that left bruises on Thomas's small arms, scans that required him to lie perfectly still while machines hummed and clicked around him, consultations with specialists whose degrees covered their office walls like expensive wallpaper. I accompanied Thomas to every appointment. Victoria usually had charitable obligations or business meetings. Richard traveled frequently, managing their financial interests across multiple time zones. So it was Elena who held Thomas's hand during procedures, Elena who explained what the machines were doing, Elena who sang lullabies in waiting rooms filled with other worried caregivers. The specialists' offices were located in Manhattan's most prestigious medical buildings, places where wealth bought you immediate access and comfortable surroundings. But money couldn't buy you different results. The tests revealed what my heart had known for months. Thomas was very, very sick. Leukemia. The word fell into our lives like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that reached every corner of our existence. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, to be precise. Aggressive. Advanced. The oncologist, Dr. Patterson, delivered the news in his corner office overlooking the East River, his voice carrying the weight of too many similar conversations. Victoria went completely silent. Richard immediately began calculating treatment costs, insurance coverage, the impact on their financial planning. I just held Thomas closer and wondered how the world could continue spinning when everything had stopped. The treatment protocol was brutal, chemotherapy that would make Thomas sick before it made him better. Hospital stays that stretched across weeks, a routine that revolved around blood counts and nausea and the constant fear of infection. Their penthouse apartment was transformed into a sterile environment, visitors restricted, every surface sanitized daily. I became Thomas's primary caregiver in ways I'd never been before. I learned to administer medications, monitor his temperature, recognize the warning signs of complications. I slept on a cot beside his hospital bed during his inpatient stays, singing the same lullabies that had soothed him as an infant. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. I'd whisper into the darkness, my voice hoarse from crying when he couldn't see. How I wonder what you are. Richard hired the best oncology team money could buy. Their medical bills exceeded most people's annual income. They flew in specialists for second opinions, researched experimental treatments available only in private clinics, investigated every possible avenue that wealth could access. Their investment advisors recommended liquidating certain assets to ensure unlimited medical funding. But as months passed, the brutal reality became clear. Sometimes money isn't the currency that matters most. Thomas responded initially to treatment, his small body fighting with remarkable courage. There were good days when his laughter filled the hospital room, when he felt strong enough to color or play simple games. There were terrible days when he couldn't keep down sips of water, when fever made him delirious, when I held his hand and prayed to every saint I could remember from my childhood. Victoria began to unravel. The woman who had always been perfectly composed, constantly in control, started drinking wine at breakfast. She'd stand at the window of Thomas's hospital room, staring out at the city she had once conquered, her reflection ghostly against the glass. I don't understand, she'd whisper to no one in particular. We did everything right. We gave him everything. Richard threw himself deeper into work, as if generating more wealth might somehow purchase his son's recovery. Their stock portfolio performance became an obsession. Cryptocurrency investments monitored hourly, real estate acquisitions pursued with desperate energy. He seemed to believe that accumulating enough zeros in their accounts might tip the scales in Thomas's favor. I understood their grief differently. I grieved for the little boy who asked why he couldn't play outside anymore, who wondered if his hair would grow back, who worried that he was disappointing his parents by being sick. I grieved for every missed opportunity to tell him how much I loved him, for every moment I'd wasted being cautious about my place in his world. During one particularly difficult night, when Thomas's fever spiked and the medical team worked frantically to stabilize him, I found myself in the hospital chapel. It was a small, quiet space with simple wooden pews and stained glass windows that caught the city lights. I hadn't prayed in years, not since my own losses had made me question everything I'd been taught to believe, but desperation makes believers of us all. "If you're listening," I whispered into the silence, "please don't take him. He's just a little boy. He hasn't had enough time to be happy. I'll give anything. My life, my health, whatever years I have left. Just please, please let him live." The silence that followed felt like an answer in itself. By the end of his first year of treatment, Thomas had endured more than most adults face in a lifetime. His body was small and thin, his eyes mature beyond their years, his spirit remarkable in its resilience. But the cancer was relentless. Each round of chemotherapy bought time rather than promising cure. Each test result was measured in small victories rather than overwhelming triumph. The medical team began having different conversations with Richard and Victoria. Phrases like quality of life and making him comfortable entered their vocabulary. Dr. Patterson's usually confident demeanor softened into something more pastoral, more gentle. The 3-month prognosis came on a gray October morning. Thomas was hospitalized again, his small body struggling with complications from the latest round of treatment. Dr. Patterson requested a family meeting in the conference room down the hall from the pediatric oncology unit. The room smelled like industrial disinfectant and contained artificial flowers in a plastic vase, someone's attempt to make official bad news feel more bearable. Richard sat straight-backed in his expensive suit, his phone face down on the table, but still glowing with incoming messages about market movements. Victoria clutched a tissue box, her usually perfect makeup smudged beneath red-rimmed eyes. I stood near the window, technically staff but emotionally central to every discussion about Thomas's care. "We've explored every available treatment option," Dr. Patterson began, his hands folded on the table between us. "Thomas has shown remarkable courage, and we've had some positive responses. But the reality is that his body isn't responding to treatment the way we hoped." The words that followed felt like physical blows. Tumor markers rising, treatment options exhausted, perhaps 3 months, possibly less. Time to consider palliative care, to focus on comfort rather than cure, to help him have the best possible quality of life in whatever time remained. Victoria made a sound like air escaping from a punctured balloon. Richard's phone vibrated again, probably his investment advisor with updates on their portfolio performance. But for once, he didn't reach for it. "There must be something," Richard said, his voice cracking in a way I'd never heard before. "Clinical trials, experimental treatments. We have unlimited resources. Money is no object." Dr. Patterson's expression was gentle but firm. "Mr. Whitmore, I understand your frustration. Believe me, if wealth could cure cancer, no child in my care would ever die. But sometimes, the bravest thing loving parents can do is help their child be comfortable and surrounded by love." That evening, I found myself alone with Thomas while his parents met with hospital social workers to discuss end-of-life planning. He was awake, drawing with crayons on a piece of paper, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration the way it had since he was a toddler. "What are you making, sweetheart?" I asked, settling into the chair beside his bed. He held up his drawing, a picture of a house with 2 figures standing in front of it. One was clearly him, recognizable by the baseball cap he wore to cover his head since losing his hair. The other figure was taller, with long, dark hair and a smile. "It's you and me," he said matter-of-factly, "in the house where we're going to live when I'm all better." My heart shattered and reassembled itself in the same moment. "Tell me about this house," I managed to whisper. "It has a big kitchen where you make pancakes every morning. he said, adding details to his drawing, and a yard where we can plant flowers, and a special room just for reading stories, and you won't have to work for anybody else because I'll be your family. I pulled him gently into my arms, breathing in the scent of hospital soap and something indefinably him that no illness could steal. "You are my family," I whispered against his forehead. "You always have been. You always will be." That night, after Thomas fell asleep and his parents returned to their penthouse to make phone calls about funeral arrangements and estate planning, I made a decision that would change everything. I couldn't accept that this beautiful, brave little boy had only 3 months left to live. I couldn't accept that all our love, all our fighting, all our hope would end in defeat. There had to be something more we could do, someone we hadn't consulted, some treatment we hadn't tried. Money couldn't buy miracles, but maybe love could. I spent that entire night researching, calling contacts from my past, reaching out to anyone who might have information about alternative treatments or experimental protocols. I contacted children's hospitals across the country, spoke with nurses who'd seen unexpected recoveries, tracked down stories of families who'd been given similar prognoses, and somehow found different endings. By morning, I had a list. Dr. Angela Rodriguez ran a pediatric oncology clinic in Houston that specialized in cases other hospitals had given up on. She'd developed treatment protocols that combined traditional chemotherapy with innovative approaches that supported the body's own healing mechanisms. Her success rates weren't miraculous, but they were better than giving up. Dr. Michael Chen in San Francisco was conducting clinical trials on a treatment that used the patient's own immune cells, reprogrammed to fight cancer more effectively. The research was promising, though still experimental. Dr. Sarah Williams at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia had experience with cases similar to Thomas's and was willing to review his files for a second opinion. When Richard and Victoria arrived the next morning, I presented my research. Richard listened with the focused attention he usually reserved for investment opportunities. Victoria stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. "Elena," she said, her voice carrying that familiar condescension, "we appreciate your enthusiasm, but we've consulted with the best doctors money can buy. If they say there's nothing more to be done, then there's nothing more to be done." "With respect, Mrs. Whitmore," I replied, steadying my voice, "the best doctors are sometimes the ones who haven't given up yet." Richard looked up from the papers I'd handed him. "Some of these treatments are experimental, unproven. The success rates are better than 0%, I interrupted, something I'd never done before. "If Thomas only has 3 months, what do we lose by trying?" For the first time in years, Richard and Victoria actually looked at me. Not through me, not past me, but at me. They saw a woman who had loved their son longer and more consistently than anyone else in his life. They saw someone who refused to accept defeat. "The costs would be enormous," Victoria said quietly. "Travel, treatment, housing, round-the-clock care. Our financial advisors have already restructured our investment portfolio to account for Thomas's medical expenses. This would require liquidating significant assets." "Then liquidate them," I said simply. "What good are Bitcoin holdings and stock dividends if Thomas isn't here to inherit them?" That afternoon, Richard made phone calls to Dr. Rodriguez in Houston. By evening, we had an appointment for the following week. Victoria contacted their wealth management team to discuss restructuring their financial position to support extended treatment options, their multi-million-dollar art collection, their vacation properties, their luxury investments. Everything was suddenly on the table. I helped Thomas pack his favorite stuffed animals and books for the trip to Houston. He was excited about flying on their private jet again, about staying in a new hospital, about meeting doctors who might have different ideas. "Do you think they can make me better, Lena?" he asked as I folded his clothes into a small suitcase. "I think they're going to try very hard," I answered truthfully. "And I think you're the bravest boy I've ever known." He smiled then, that radiant smile that had been my sunshine for 6 years. "Will you stay with me? even if it takes a long time? Wild horses couldn't drag me away, I promised, using an expression my grandmother had taught me decades earlier. The flight to Houston felt like traveling toward hope rather than away from everything familiar. Thomas slept curled against my shoulder, while Richard and Victoria reviewed medical records and financial projections. Their conversations were different now, focused on treatment schedules rather than social obligations, on recovery timelines rather than quarterly earnings reports. Dr. Rodriguez was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 40s, with kind eyes and an energy that filled her small office. She spent 2 hours reviewing Thomas's case, asking questions about his symptoms, his responses to previous treatments, his overall quality of life. "I'm not going to lie to you," she said finally, addressing Thomas directly rather than talking over his head to his parents. "You've been through a lot, and your body is tired, but I've seen children sicker than you are get better. I've seen families told to give up find reasons to celebrate." She outlined a treatment protocol that was aggressive but different from what he'd received in New York. It would require a minimum 6-month commitment, possibly longer. He would need to live in Houston during treatment, with his primary caregiver available around the clock. "I'll stay," I said immediately before anyone else could speak. "Whatever he needs for however long he needs it." Richard nodded first, then Victoria. For the first time since Thomas's diagnosis, we were united in our determination to fight. The house we rented in Houston was small compared to the Manhattan penthouse, a 3-bedroom ranch in a quiet neighborhood near the hospital. Thomas loved having a yard where he could sit outside when his energy allowed. I loved having a kitchen window that overlooked a garden instead of a courtyard. Victoria stayed for the first month, then began traveling back and forth between Houston and New York to manage their business interests. Richard visited regularly but maintained their financial operations remotely, liquidating assets as needed to fund treatment. For the first time in 6 years, I was Thomas's primary everything, not just his caregiver, but his advocate, his companion, his family. I drove him to appointments, consulted with his medical team, made decisions about his daily care. The responsibility was enormous, but it felt like coming home. The treatment was brutal in different ways. Thomas lost more weight, experienced different side effects, endured procedures that tested his courage daily. But something was different. Whether it was Dr. Rodriguez's approach, the change of environment, or simply the power of refusing to give up, Thomas's body began to respond. His blood counts improved gradually. His energy increased slightly. He began asking for second helpings at dinner, something he hadn't done in months. Small improvements, but improvements nonetheless. Victoria noticed the changes during one of her visits. "He looks different," she said, watching Thomas play with blocks in the living room. Brighter, somehow. I wanted to tell her that children bloom when they feel genuinely loved, when they sense that the adults around them haven't given up hope. Instead, I simply nodded. "Dr. Rodriguez thinks the new protocol is working," I said. "Slowly, but working." By the end of our 4th month in Houston, Thomas's latest scans showed something miraculous. The tumors were shrinking, not gone but smaller, responding, fighting back. Dr. Rodriguez called it an excellent response. Richard called it a sound return on their investment. Victoria wept with relief. I called it the first real breath I'd taken in over a year. Thomas's improvement continued slowly but steadily. His hair began growing back in soft curls that made him look younger than his years. His appetite returned with enthusiasm that had me cooking constantly. His laughter came more easily, rang more freely through our temporary home. During one of our evening walks around the neighborhood, he slipped his hand into mine, no longer frail and cold, but warm and strong. "Lena," he said thoughtfully, "when I'm all better, are we still going to live together?" The question caught me off guard. We'd been so focused on getting him healthy that I hadn't considered what would happen next. His parents' marriage seemed stronger than it had been in years, united by their shared fight for Thomas's life. Their financial sacrifices had brought them closer to each other and to their son. I said carefully, we're going to be family no matter where we live. He squeezed my hand. Good, because you're the most important person in my whole world. 8 months after his 3-month prognosis, Thomas's scans showed something that made Dr. Rodriguez smile wider than I'd ever seen her smile. Complete remission. The cancer was gone. Not dormant, not controlled, but gone. The celebration was quiet but profound. Thomas hugged everyone in Dr. Rodriguez's office, from the receptionist to the medical residents to the cleaning staff who'd become his friends. Richard actually cried, something I'd never witnessed in 6 years of working for his family. Victoria held Thomas for so long that he eventually squirmed away, embarrassed by the attention. I stood in the corner and marveled at the miracle we'd all been part of creating. The transition back to New York felt strange after almost a year in Houston. The penthouse seemed enormous and cold after our cozy rental house. The staff, the formality, the distance between family members, everything felt different now. Thomas had trouble readjusting to his old environment. He gravitated toward the kitchen where I worked, wanting to help prepare meals and tell stories about our adventures in Houston. He seemed smaller and lonelier in the vast spaces of his parents' world. Victoria noticed his struggles and made an unexpected decision. She converted one of the guest rooms into a family room adjacent to the kitchen, where Thomas could spend time near me while I worked. She installed a comfortable reading chair, a small television, shelves for his books and toys. "He's used to having you close by," she explained, as if she'd just discovered something revolutionary. "This way, he can be comfortable while you work." It was the closest she'd ever come to acknowledging that I was more than hired help in her son's life. Richard made his own kinds of changes. He began working from home more frequently, timing his calls around Thomas's schedule, making space for family dinners and spontaneous conversations. Their financial portfolio had taken a significant hit from Thomas's medical expenses, but their investment in their son's health had paid dividends that couldn't be measured in dollars. One evening, as I helped Thomas prepare for bed, he presented me with a drawing he'd been working on for days. It was more sophisticated than his previous artwork, a scene of our house in Houston with 3 figures standing in the front yard: Thomas, me, and a third figure I didn't immediately recognize. "Who's this?" I asked, pointing to the third person. "That's my guardian angel," he said matter-of-factly, "the one who helped you figure out how to make me better." I studied the drawing more carefully. The guardian angel looked remarkably like a little girl with dark curls. "Thomas," I said slowly, "why does your angel look like a little girl?" He shrugged with the casual wisdom of someone who'd spent time thinking about life and death. Dr. Rodriguez told me that sometimes people who die before us help take care of people who are still alive. I think maybe your little girl helped take care of me. The breath left my body. I had never told Thomas about Maria, my daughter who had died of leukemia 20 years earlier in a public hospital where I couldn't afford the treatments that might have saved her. I had never mentioned the guilt that drove me to love other people's children with desperate intensity, the grief that made me pour my heart into caring for Thomas as if my devotion could somehow retroactively save my own child. "How did you know?" I whispered. "I dreamed about her sometimes, when I was really sick," he said simply. "She had dark hair like yours, and she told me not to be scared because you were taking such good care of me. She said she was proud of her mama." I pulled Thomas into my arms and wept for Maria, for Thomas, for the impossible circle of love and loss and healing that had brought us all together. 2 years later, Thomas remains in remission. He's grown taller. His face has filled out. His energy seems limitless. He attends a regular school now, plays soccer with neighborhood kids, argues about bedtime like any healthy 8-year-old. I'm still his nanny officially, but the boundaries Victoria once insisted upon have blurred into something more honest, more real. Thomas calls me Lena when we're alone, and Miss Elena when his parents' friends visit. Sometimes he slips and calls me Mama, which makes Victoria smile now instead of frown. Richard established a foundation in Thomas's name that funds experimental pediatric cancer treatments for families who can't afford them. Their reduced investment portfolio still generates enough passive income to support their lifestyle comfortably, but their priorities have shifted dramatically. They measure wealth differently now, in time spent together, in Thomas's laughter, in peaceful nights without emergency room visits. Victoria and I have developed something approaching friendship. She asks my opinions about Thomas's schooling, includes me in conversations about his future, acknowledges my role in his recovery in ways she never did before. The woman who once reminded me to remember my place now seems to understand that love doesn't have boundaries that can be enforced with job descriptions. Last month, Thomas asked me a question that made my heart skip. Lena, when I grow up and have kids of my own, will you take care of them too? If you want me to, I answered, and if I'm still around. You'll be around, he said with absolute certainty. Guardian angels live forever. Sometimes families are born from blood and sometimes from choice. Sometimes miracles come from medicine and sometimes from love, so fierce it refuses to accept defeat. Sometimes nannies remain staff, and sometimes they become the heart of everything that matters most. I think about the woman I was 6 years ago, folding tiny clothes with trembling hands, accepting my invisibility as the price of loving someone else's child. I think about the nights I prayed for Maria's forgiveness, wondering if caring for other people's children could somehow balance the scales of my own loss. The truth I've learned is this: love doesn't diminish when you share it. Love multiplies. The love I gave to Thomas didn't take anything away from Maria's memory. It honored it. The fight I fought for his life gave meaning to the fight I couldn't win for hers. Today, I live in my own apartment in Queens, close enough to the Whitmores to be available when needed, but far enough away to have my own space, my own life, my own choices. Thomas visits me every weekend, helps me tend the small garden I've planted, tells me about school and friends and dreams for the future. Victoria covers my rent and health care, calls it a family expense that their accountant handles like any other investment in their son's well-being. Richard increased my salary to reflect my expanded role in Thomas's life, established a retirement account that ensures I'll be secure in my later years. But the greatest gift they've given me is recognition. They see me now. They value what I do. They understand that I'm not just someone they hired to care for their child. I'm someone who loved their child back to life. Now, as Thomas grows into the remarkable young man I always knew he would become, new challenges and joys unfold every day. He's 10 years old now, his remission solid and strong, his future bright with possibilities that once seemed impossible. But with growth comes complexity, and with health comes the luxury of dealing with normal childhood concerns instead of life and death crises. School has been an adjustment. Thomas missed so much during his treatment years that catching up academically required patience and creativity. Victoria initially wanted to hire the most expensive tutors Manhattan had to offer, but I convinced her that Thomas needed to feel normal, to struggle and succeed alongside his peers rather than being constantly reminded of his special circumstances. He's already different from other children, I explained to her during one of our newly regular conversations over coffee in the family room she'd created. He's been through things most adults never experience, but he doesn't need to be isolated because of it. He needs to be celebrated for who he's becoming, not protected from who he might be. Victoria listened in a way she never had before. The woman who once made decisions without consulting anyone now sought my input on everything from Thomas's class schedule to his social activities. Our relationship had evolved from employer-employee to something more collaborative, more respectful. Thomas thrived in his neighborhood public school. His teachers were initially concerned about his medical history, worried about his physical limitations, uncertain about how to handle a child who'd faced mortality before he lost his first tooth. But Thomas surprised everyone with his resilience, his empathy, and his uncanny ability to help other children through their own difficulties. When his classmate Jamie broke his arm and felt scared about going to the hospital, Thomas sat with him during recess and explained exactly what the X-ray machine would sound like, how the doctors would help, why Jamie didn't need to be afraid. When Sarah Chen started crying because her grandmother was sick, Thomas shared his drawing supplies and helped her make a get well card. Thomas has this gift. His third-grade teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, no relation to his Houston doctor, told me during a parent-teacher conference. He understands pain in a way that helps him comfort others. He's like a little therapist sometimes. I smiled, remembering the little boy who used to dream about becoming a superhero who could help sick children feel better. Perhaps he'd found his superpower after all. The foundation Richard established in Thomas's name grew beyond anything we'd initially imagined. What started as a way to help other families access experimental treatments evolved into a comprehensive support system for children with cancer and their caregivers. The foundation funded medical research, provided housing for families during treatment, offered educational programs, and created support networks for siblings and parents navigating the impossible landscape of childhood illness. Victoria became actively involved in the foundation's work, transforming from a socialite who attended charity galas for appearances into someone who rolled up her sleeves and made real differences in real lives. She visited hospitals, met with families, advocated for policy changes, and used her social connections to raise awareness and funding. "I never understood before," she told me one afternoon after returning from a visit to the pediatric oncology ward where Thomas had been treated. "I thought writing checks was enough. I thought money was the only thing parents needed to help their sick children. But what they really need is hope, and someone who believes their child can survive." Richard's approach was characteristically systematic. He applied his investment expertise to the foundation, studying outcomes data, analyzing which programs produced the best results, optimizing their impact per dollar spent. But even he was changed by the work. The man who once measured everything in financial terms now talked about success stories, about families reunited, about children who exceeded their prognoses. The return on investment, he said during one of their foundation board meetings, isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in birthdays celebrated, in first days of school, in bedtime stories that we almost never got to tell. As Thomas grew stronger and our lives settled into new patterns of normalcy, I began to share more of my own story with him. He'd always known about Maria in the abstract way children understand that adults have histories before them. But now he was old enough to understand the deeper connections, the ways our losses and loves intertwined. On Maria's birthday each year, Thomas and I would visit the small memorial garden I'd created in Central Park. Not officially, but I'd planted flowers there and tended them for 20 years, creating a space where I could remember my daughter. Thomas would bring drawings or letters he'd written to her, thanking her for watching over him during his sickness, telling her about his life and dreams. "Do you think she's happy that I got better when she didn't?" he asked during one of these visits, his voice carrying the weight of survivor's guilt that many childhood cancer patients experience. I knelt beside him, arranging the fresh flowers we'd brought. "I think she's happy that love won," I said carefully. "I think she's happy that all the love I had for her found a way to help save you. And I think she's happiest that you're using your second chance at life to help other people." Thomas nodded thoughtfully, then placed his latest drawing beside the flowers. A picture of 3 figures holding hands under a bright sun. Himself, me, and a little girl with dark curls who looked remarkably like the Maria in my old photographs. The challenges of raising a child who'd survived cancer extended beyond the medical appointments and follow-up scans that would continue for years. Thomas sometimes struggled with anxiety about his health, interpreting every minor illness as a potential return of the cancer. He'd become hypervigilant about his body, worried when he felt tired, panicked if he developed any unusual symptoms. We worked with a child psychologist, Dr. Jennifer Liu, who specialized in helping young cancer survivors navigate their complex relationships with their own bodies and futures. She taught Thomas coping strategies for managing his anxiety, helped him understand the difference between reasonable health awareness and counterproductive worry. Surviving cancer as a child, Dr. Liu explained to me during one of our sessions, creates a unique form of trauma. On one hand, these children develop incredible resilience and maturity. On the other hand, they lose a certain innocence about safety and permanence that most children take for granted. Thomas knows in ways most 10-year-olds don't that life can change instantly, that bodies can betray us, that love doesn't always protect us from loss. But she also pointed out Thomas's remarkable emotional intelligence, his capacity for empathy, his ability to find meaning in suffering. He's going to help a lot of people in his life, she predicted. Children who survive what he survived often become healers in whatever field they choose. Indeed, Thomas's interests were gravitating toward helping others. He devoured books about doctors and nurses, asked endless questions about how the human body worked, spent hours playing elaborate games where his action figures performed surgeries or discovered cures for diseases. When other children his age were obsessed with sports or video games, Thomas was fascinated by medical journals I brought home from the Foundation's offices. During the summer after his 10th birthday, Thomas announced that he wanted to participate in the Foundation's annual fundraising walk. Hundreds of families affected by childhood cancer gathered in Central Park for a 3-mile walk that raised money for research and support programs. Previously, Thomas had been too sick to participate, but this year, he was strong enough to complete the entire route. "I want to walk for all the kids who can't walk yet," he told the local news reporter who interviewed him before the event, "and for all the kids who never got to walk again. And I want to thank all the doctors and nurses and nannies who love us, even when we're sick." Watching Thomas cross the finish line that day, surrounded by hundreds of other survivors and their families, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Maria's death: complete, uncomplicated joy. Not joy tinged with worry about the future, not joy shadowed by past losses, but pure celebration of life and love and the miraculous resilience of the human spirit. Richard and Victoria were there, of course, walking beside Thomas and cheering him on. But so were Dr. Rodriguez from Houston, who'd flown in specially for the event, several of the nurses from his treatment team, his teachers from school, and dozens of other families the Foundation had helped over the years. Thomas had attracted a community of love that extended far beyond our immediate family. After the walk during the celebration in the park, I found myself sitting on a bench watching Thomas play with other survivor children. They were running around with the boundless energy of healthy kids, their medical histories invisible to casual observers, but I could see the small signs, the careful way they monitored each other for tiredness, the protective instincts they'd developed toward younger or sicker children, the mature conversations they had about hospitals and treatments. Victoria sat beside me, following my gaze to where Thomas was organizing a game that included children of various ages and abilities. "He's remarkable," she said quietly, "and so much of who he's become is because of you." I shook my head. He was always remarkable. I just helped him stay alive long enough for everyone else to see it. "No," Victoria insisted, her voice unusually serious. "You did more than that. You loved him when we were too scared to fully love him. You fought for him when we were paralyzed by the possibility of losing him. You saw his future when we could only see the present crisis." She paused, watching Thomas help a younger child who'd fallen down. "I was so afraid of getting attached," she continued. "I thought if I kept some distance, if I maintained some control, it would hurt less if we lost him. But you threw yourself completely into loving him, even knowing you might lose him, even knowing he wasn't technically your child to lose." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two women who'd learned different ways to love the same extraordinary boy. "Elena," Victoria said finally, using my full name in the gentle way she'd adopted over the past few years. I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Are you happy? With your life? With how things turned out? With the arrangements we have now? The question surprised me. I'd grown so accustomed to focusing entirely on Thomas's needs, on the family's needs, that I rarely considered my own happiness as a separate entity worth examining. I'm grateful, I said carefully. Thomas is healthy. You and Richard have become people I genuinely respect and care about. I have meaningful work with the foundation. That's not what I asked, Victoria interrupted gently. I asked if you're happy, if there are things you want for yourself that you've set aside, dreams you haven't pursued, relationships you've avoided because of your commitment to our family. I thought about the question seriously. Was I happy? I loved Thomas as if he were my own son. My relationship with the Whitmores had evolved into something deeper than employment, closer to genuine family connection. My work with the foundation gave me purpose and allowed me to help other families avoid the tragedy I'd experienced with Maria. But Victoria was asking about Elena the individual, not Elena the caregiver. Elena the woman who'd postponed her own dreams for decades, first while caring for Maria during her illness, then while grieving her loss, then while pouring all her maternal energy into Thomas. I've been thinking about going back to school, I admitted, surprising myself with the confession. Before Maria got sick, I was studying to become a nurse. I never finished my degree. Sometimes I wonder if I could still do that, if it's too late to become the person I planned to be before everything changed. Victoria smiled, the first completely unguarded smile I'd ever seen from her. It's never too late, and with everything you've learned taking care of Thomas, you'd be an incredible nurse, especially in pediatric oncology. Over the following months, Victoria and Richard helped me research nursing programs designed for adult students with extensive healthcare experience. They offered to pay for my education, to adjust my schedule so I could attend classes while still being available for Thomas's needs, to support whatever path I wanted to pursue. Consider it an investment, Richard said with a slight smile. The foundation could use a nurse practitioner on staff, someone who understands both the medical and emotional aspects of childhood cancer treatment. The idea of returning to school at 45 felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I'd spent so many years defining myself in relation to other people's needs that pursuing my own dreams seemed almost selfish. But Thomas, now 11 and increasingly independent, was my biggest cheerleader. You helped me get better, Lena, he said when I told him about my plans. Now you should help lots of other kids get better too. You'll be the best nurse ever because you know how to love kids who are scared. So I enrolled in an accelerated nursing program for adults with healthcare experience. The coursework was challenging but familiar. I'd learned much of it hands-on during Thomas's treatment years. The clinical rotations were emotionally difficult but deeply meaningful. Working with other families facing childhood illness, I was able to offer not just medical care, but the kind of emotional support that only comes from shared experience. My fellow students were mostly younger, fresh from college and full of theoretical knowledge, but limited practical experience. I brought a different perspective, depth of understanding about how families cope with crisis, insight into the long-term effects of childhood illness, awareness of the often invisible emotional needs of caregivers and siblings. During my pediatric oncology rotation, I was assigned to care for a 6-year-old girl named Sophie whose leukemia wasn't responding to standard treatments. Her parents were researching experimental options, traveling between hospitals, spending their savings on consultations with specialists around the world. Their desperation reminded me so clearly of my own journey with both Maria and Thomas. After several shifts caring for Sophie, her mother pulled me aside. "The other nurses are very competent," she said, "but there's something different about the way you talk to her. She actually looks forward to your shifts. She says you understand what she's going through." I sat with Sophie's mother in the family lounge and shared my story. Not all of it, but enough for her to understand that I'd been where she was, that I'd fought these battles from both sides. I told her about Dr. Rodriguez in Houston, about the importance of not giving up when local doctors ran out of options, about the way love and determination could sometimes create possibilities that medical textbooks said didn't exist. 6 months later, I received a photo in the mail, Sophie in remission, smiling beside a birthday cake shaped like a butterfly. Her mother had written on the back, "Thank you for teaching us that hope is a choice we make every day." These connections became the most rewarding part of my nursing career. I specialized in pediatric oncology, working part-time at the hospital while also serving as a nurse coordinator for the foundation. My role evolved into something unique. Part medical professional, part emotional counselor, part advocate for families navigating the impossible terrain of childhood cancer. Thomas, now 13, had grown into a remarkably grounded teenager despite his extraordinary childhood experiences. He continued to excel academically, played on his school's soccer team with his doctor's enthusiastic approval, and maintained the kind of deep friendships that develop between children who face serious challenges together. His relationship with his parents had settled into something healthier than what I'd observed during his early childhood. Victoria was more present, more emotionally available, less focused on appearances and social expectations. Richard still worked extensively but prioritized family time and involved Thomas in foundation activities in age-appropriate ways. Our relationships with each other had also evolved. I was no longer just the nanny, but not quite a family member in the traditional sense either. We'd created something new, a chosen family structure that honored both love and boundaries, both intimacy and independence. Thomas spent most weekends at my apartment in Queens, helping me tend my expanded garden, cooking elaborate meals together, working on his school projects while I studied for continuing education courses. Victoria and Richard joined us for Sunday dinners, our conversations ranging from Thomas's future plans to foundation business to my nursing career to their own ongoing growth as individuals and partners. "We're not a typical family," Thomas observed during one of these dinners, "but we're a good family." He was right. We'd all been broken by different experiences. Richard and Victoria by the near loss of their son. Thomas by his illness and treatment, me by Maria's death and the years of grief that followed. But we'd found ways to heal together, to create something strong and beautiful from our shared commitment to love and fight for each other. As Thomas entered high school, his interests in medicine and helping others continued to develop. He volunteered at children's hospitals, participated in medical research as both a survivor and an advocate, spoke at foundation events about the patient perspective on cancer treatment. His experiences had given him wisdom beyond his years, but he'd somehow managed to retain the joy and optimism that made him such a remarkable young man. During his sophomore year, he wrote an essay for English class titled "My Three Mothers." The first mother, he wrote, was Victoria, who gave him life and provided for all his physical needs. The second mother was Elena, who kept him alive with her love and advocacy during the darkest times. The third mother was Maria, the guardian angel who watched over him and guided Elena to save his life. "Some people think you can only have one real mother," his essay concluded, "but I think love is bigger than rules. I think family is whoever shows up when you need them most, and I think guardian angels can work through living people to perform miracles." When Thomas showed me the essay, I cried, not from sadness this time, but from overwhelming gratitude for the intricate web of love that had saved us all. Years have passed now, and Thomas is preparing for college. He wants to study medicine, specializing in pediatric oncology, continuing the circle of healing that began with his own survival. Victoria and Richard have created a scholarship program through the foundation, funding medical education for students who've survived childhood cancer or who demonstrate exceptional commitment to pediatric care. I completed my nursing degree with honors and now work as a pediatric oncology nurse practitioner, splitting my time between clinical care and foundation work. My patients and their families often comment on my unique ability to understand their experiences, to offer hope without false promises, to advocate fiercely while remaining realistic about outcomes. The Whitmore Family Foundation has helped thousands of children access treatment, supported hundreds of families through their darkest hours, funded research that has led to new treatment protocols, and improved survival rates. What began as one family's desperate attempt to save their dying son has become a legacy of hope for countless others. But the most important legacy isn't measured in statistics or success rates. It's measured in the young man Thomas has become. Compassionate, resilient, determined to use his second chance at life to help others. It's measured in the relationships we've all built, the love we've all learned to give and receive, the ways we've all grown beyond who we were when this journey began. Sometimes I think about that terrified woman I was all those years ago, standing in the hospital corridor with a teddy bear, watching a multimillionaire crumble at his son's diagnosis. I want to tell her that love will be enough, that determination will create possibilities, that families can be built from choice as much as from blood. I want to tell her that the little girl she lost will never be forgotten, that loving another child won't diminish that first love, but will honor it. I want to tell her that her own dreams aren't dead, just deferred, and that pursuing them will make her a better caregiver, not a selfish one. Most of all, I want to tell her that miracles are real. Not the kind that happen instantly without effort, but the kind that unfold slowly through love, advocacy, medical expertise, financial resources, and the refusal to accept defeat. The kind that require communities of support, backup plans when first plans fail, and the courage to keep fighting even when healthcare professionals say there's nothing left to do. Have you ever loved a child who wasn't yours? Have you ever fought for someone else's family harder than you fought for yourself? Have you ever discovered that sometimes the most important relationships in our lives aren't defined by blood or contracts, but by the simple choice to stay, to care, to refuse to give up? Tell me your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear about the children who've touched your heart, the families who've become yours in unexpected ways, the moments when love proves stronger than any prognosis. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach other women who know what it means to love without limits, to fight without recognition, to find family in the most unexpected places. For more stories that celebrate the unsung heroes of family life, the nannies, housekeepers, caregivers, and grandmothers who hold everything together, check out our special podcast series. Click the link on the left to continue this journey of the heart. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for seeing the invisible women who love your children, who sacrifice for your families, who sometimes perform the miracles that money can't buy. We'll be here next time with another story that proves love is the most powerful medicine of all. Until then, remember, every child deserves someone who will fight for their life. Every caregiver deserves recognition for the miracles they make possible every single day. And sometimes, the family you choose loves you even more fiercely than the family you're born into. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. The world needs more people who understand that love, real, unconditional, unwavering love, can indeed work miracles.